What if fundraising's not just about the bottom line? What if it is about who you become and what you believe in the process? And what if the journey is bigger than you and your ministry?
Welcome to Season 4 of It's Not About the Money. Join us as we examine elements of ministry fundraising through the unique lens of personal formation. Let's dive in. Fundraising is often seen as a one-size-fits-all endeavor, but what happens when traditional methods don't align with the way your brain works? In this episode of It's Not About the Money, we explore the intersection of neurodiversity and support raising. Our guest, Jenilee Goodwin, helps us unpack the unique challenges and strengths that neurodivergent individuals bring to fundraising. Conditions like ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and others impact the fundraising experience. So let's talk about practical strategies for building confidence and sustainability and discuss how teams and organizations can better support neurodivergent fundraisers. Whether you're neurodivergent yourself, lead a team with neurodiverse members, or simply want to cultivate a more inclusive approach to fundraising, this conversation will equip you with fresh perspectives and actionable insights. Because at the end of the day, fundraising isn't about fitting into a mold. It's about finding what works for you. So Heather, would you do the honors of introducing our guest?
I am delighted to, Andy. So as you mentioned, we have with us today Jenilee Goodwin. Jenilee is a writer, a coach, and a veteran cross-cultural worker with experiences in a wide variety of contexts, spanning churches, schools, organizations, and even homeschooling. She can currently be found in many spaces of equipping and care for support-based workers. And I think one particularly helpful thing to note is that she actually has her certification in neurodiverse coaching and works with singles and couples that are on the field. So Jenilee, welcome to the podcast. Let's start by exploring your experiences with neurodiversity as well as your experiences in fundraising.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. This is a fantastic topic. It's one that I don't hear talked about often enough, and I think it has a great enough impact that it's great that you're talking about it today. My experience with neurodiversity kind of just came because my children are on the spectrum. I have 3 daughters: autism, ADHD, sensory processing, auditory processing, slow processing, lots of processing things. It just kind of came to my attention what a great impact this has on families. And then living overseas and working overseas and the noises and sounds and sensory and all the things that come into a day of life overseas had a big impact on my girls, a big effect on them. And it made me interested in the topic and started learning more about it. And then I also did our fundraising and administration for our work overseas. So it takes a lot of administration and creativity and marketing and speaking and newsletter writing and communication to raise a budget. And for someone on the spectrum, that's a huge task.
We recently started seeing an occupational therapist because one of our kiddos, we think, has some unique sensory processing things and potentially ADHD. We don't know. But I just understanding what the experience has been to navigate life in our home culture with the different considerations and things that has brought forward, I can only imagine how much more complex that feels in a situation where there's so much outside your control. And there really are, in many ways, elevated factors of sensory intake and things like that, a language that you can't speak, different sights and sounds. So yes, I do think this will be very helpful.
And maybe we can start by defining neurodiversity and some of the more common ways it presents in individuals.
Yeah, neurodiversity, very simply, is a biological difference in the brain. The brain science that's coming out right now about neurodiversity, the number of studies, MRI studies, and different scans, different brain mapping, that is giving us more and more information on this topic. But the simplest definition we have right now is just a difference in how the brain processes information coming in and how it processes information going out. And that includes all their senses and executive function and focus. Lots of different components fall into that category.
The broad subject.
Very.
Very broad, yes.
So, what are some common misconceptions that some people might have about neurodivergence?
Yeah, probably how popular the words are right now, I guess.
Okay.
ADHD and autism. It's easy. Oh, they have ADHD. Oh, they just can't focus. We just kind of throw it around, and that makes it complicated for someone really going through it to who's experiencing the weight and the reality of their brain working differently in a world that expects them to be able to do things just like everyone else. Misconceptions, generally we think of Rain Man or Big Bang Theory. We have
Mm,
these, intelligence, they're really smart. We have these pictures in our head of what someone with autism or ADHD might look like. And it's really a very broad spectrum. It's autism spectrum disorder.
yeah.
ADHD comes in inattentive and hyper, and there's all these different pieces and parts to each one of them that it's not just one thing and it doesn't look the same in everyone.
So, how would you, I guess, I'm sure there's so much to say here, but what comes to mind when you think of how neurodivergent individuals might experience fundraising differently?
Differently in that they experience all the same things, but it can have a greater impact. It can have a higher cost, a
Mm,
day of socializing and trying to connect with people, trying to remember faces, trying to read social cues can just be exhausting and overwhelming for someone on the spectrum. Someone
mm,
who is neurodiverse and ADHD, they're trying to focus and hear all these, voices and remember names and who they met where and short memory issues and all different pieces of that. Most of the people that I talk to, they speak to overwhelm, burnout, a great dread when it comes to fundraising and raising support and connecting with donors. It just has a high physical cost and mental
yeah.
cost.
Yeah. And those things, all those things that you mentioned, those are hard enough for anybody,
Yep.
let alone when you factor in that multiplier of
Yep.
additional biological circumstances.
Mhm.
Yeah. But conversely, are there any ways that you see the way that neurodivergent mind working as a positive thing or bringing a strength to fundraising?
Yeah, absolutely. They're generally very fun, very interesting. They can be really charismatic and kind of the life of the party, especially if they have the ADHD component. They will have fun stories and interesting things that they're talking about, or if they're doing a deep dive into a special interest of some kind, that can be really fun. They are great at connecting with people in the sense that they're charismatic and entertaining, but yet for the person who's on the spectrum, that can be very difficult for them internally, even though it's a great asset externally.
Mm.
Interesting.
Tell me more about that. What does that mean that can be hard internally, even though it's an asset externally?
Generally, people who are neurodivergent will experience some kind of sensory overload.
Mm.
After a full day, they can be, my girls call it peopled out. They're peopled
Mm,
out.
I get it.
Too much time with people. They have either a meltdown or a shutdown. So it can be a family who's out fundraising all day. They've been at an event, then a pastor took them out to eat to a restaurant late. They get back to the hotel room and it's just meltdown,
Mm,
crying. Everybody's exhausted. If one of the parents is on the spectrum, that can leave a heavy load on the parent who's not. So externally, people can think, wow, what a great family. Everything's going great. They're doing such a great job. But internally, it cost a lot for that family to do that.
makes a
Yeah,
lot of sense.
that does make a lot of sense.
So, Jenilee, what are some common challenges that neurodivergent fundraisers might face?
Yeah, it would depend on where they're at on the spectrum of neurodivergent traits. So if they have some social challenges, maybe they struggle to read social cues, they may not be able to tell if a pastor is really interested in what they're saying or not. They may
Hmm.
be going deep into a topic about their country and what they're raising money for, and that pastor's checked out and they may not even notice. They can be the one who takes a 15-minute window of time that they're given and stretches it to 25 because they've lost track of time. The organizing, the multitasking that it takes to send an email and record something in your calendar and keep track of names and who does what at that place that they're emailing or keeping up with. all of the paperwork and reporting that comes with fundraising can be a huge challenge for anyone with executive function challenges. Administrative can just take a huge mental load for that person, and it's hard for them to keep up with. And generally, maybe they're really good at raising the funds, but they're not great at communicating what they're doing with the funds. Or maybe they're great at communicating, but they're not really sure how to raise the money. So it takes a full court press for them to be able to manage all of these things at the same time. And it generally takes a team of people or a spouse, someone who's helping them and engaging with them to kind of cover all those bases.
In your experience as a coach, as you work with people that are navigating these considerations, what does it look like for them to have a team around them? Is that generally on their physical team in country? Is that more like a core team, like people that are committed to them back home? Is it typically within a close relationship like a marriage? How do you see people being supported practically?
Practically, right now, a lot of times by the time they come to see me, they're experiencing some kind of burnout. They've been trying to do it all on their own and trying to keep up with everything. A lot of times they feel a sense of failure, like everybody else can do this and I can't do this. Why is this so hard for me? It just seems like everybody else can do this. A lot of times when they feel that, they may not even know that they have ADHD. They may not know that they have autism. We're seeing a lot of late diagnosis. I think this is going to change, though, with younger generations coming up. I think our next wave of workers, of missionaries on the field, they do know more of this language. They do know that they have ADHD. They're more aware of these kinds of impacts that it has on them. They're familiar with needing accommodations or needing help. I think my age, 30s, 40s, 50s, we just didn't know. We weren't diagnosing high functioning autism. We really weren't diagnosing ADHD that much. We especially weren't in girls. So to build that team for people who are already on the field, maybe more experienced, don't have a diagnosis or just getting a diagnosis, they're building that team generally through coaching, through someone maybe in their home church or a supporting pastor who understands that they're able to be vulnerable enough with, who steps in to help maybe with newsletters or helps with reporting. It does tend to fall a lot on the spouse in a marriage relationship. I'd love to see some of that change as our organizations start to acknowledge this, that there can be more support within our organizations so that the majority doesn't fall on the spouse to kind of pick up that mental load.
Sure. I am curious, like why it wasn't diagnosed in girls as much as boys.
Even up into the 90s, we didn't really diagnose girls with autism, and we weren't really looking at the inattentive type of ADHD, which is where a lot of girls typically fall. So we just saw the little boy who was kind of running around the room and couldn't sit still, or we saw the kid in the back of the class who kind of flapped his hands and maybe didn't speak, or he was like visibly different from the other kids. We weren't noticing the kids sitting in the room who maybe did okay in school, but they were really sensitive to the sound and the kids around them and the things that were we didn't see sensory in the same way. We weren't diagnosing it full as a spectrum as we do today. Okay. So it's very helpful for adults who realize, oh, this is why I'm different. This is why my brain is different. This is why I still don't like that texture of food, or I still don't like that feeling of clothes on my skin. Adults are realizing you don't just grow out of this. You still have these things into adulthood.
What do you find when adults make this discovery? Is it like a relief or something else?
A lot of times it's a huge relief to find out that there's a name for what they're struggling with and what they're challenged with. I was recently talking with a single worker in Europe, and she was saying how helpful this was because she was able to go back. Her mom still had some diagnostic testing that she'd done as a little girl. And she was able to look at that and think, oh, that's still impacting me. That impacts how I have learned a language. That still is a problem for me. So it was very affirming and very helpful. It can be challenging if labels were ever made out to be a bad thing, or if those were things that were not talked about in your home or in your school. It can make acceptance challenging, but the benefit of knowing and getting the right kind of help can be just a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, because culturally and even within the church, there can be an emphasis to steward your time, maximize your impact. There's just this drive, subtle in some spaces, but this drive towards being optimized and being able to do all the things. And I think none of us are actually capable of the optimization we're always aiming for.
Right.
But I think it's just so helpful to realize, to just accept, like you said, and realize like, oh, by design, by the way God has formed me, that just takes me a lot more energy to do. And it's not because I'm, doing something wrong or lazy or whatever these other maybe like assumptions we make when somebody isn't performing in a certain way.
Yeah.
It can just be so helpful to realize, no, that's just actually a limitation I have. And with any limitation we have, an invitation to rely on Jesus.
Absolutely.
So good.
Absolutely.
So I guess like if we were just going to talk about maybe specific elements in the traditional like fundraising model or the way we typically see people fundraising, what are some like particular things within that might be more difficult or that you see people struggling with?
The biggest one that keeps coming to mind, a lot of organizations have the model of you have to raise this massive budget and it doesn't, you need people, you need churches, you have to figure out how to build this massive budget. But that creates a huge donor base. If you're looking at donations of $25 a month or $75 a month or $150 a month, your donor base just grows and grows to get this large base.
Right.
And there's different thought about should you just have 5 churches and they're all giving a lot instead of having 200 churches that are giving a little. I think for a neurodivergent person, that smaller donor base could be really helpful because they have less people that they have to keep up with, communicate with, keep in front of. If we can have an understanding, that's really hard for them. So if you've got 100 donors or 50 churches who are all sending you, please fill out this form. Can you send us a 2-minute video? It just overwhelms them to the point that they don't want to open their email. It's very challenging. And they have such a beautiful heart to do what they're wanting to do and what they're raising money to do. But some of these challenges can really make it difficult. If they don't have facial memory, if they don't remember faces and they don't remember a pastor's name and they don't remember what church that pastor goes with, or they don't remember they're standing in front of someone and they don't know that's the person who gave $10,000 towards this one project. And it can be very awkward and embarrassing, and they can really struggle without some accommodation in place to help them with those things.
So fewer relational details to juggle.
Or a support team that helps with that, because that's a lot to keep up with.
Absolutely.
So let's get practical. What are some practical strategies that neurodivergent individuals can use to build confidence and sustainability in their efforts?
I think the acceptance piece, just personally for them, accepting that exactly what you've said, Heather, the ways that they are doing things, the ways that they were made to do things are different, and that's okay. And how can we work within their strengths and then support and accommodate weaknesses? It's not a pass or fail, good or bad, productive or not productive. This is what's possible to do, and how can we accommodate and help make that more sustainable for the person who is trying to raise funds or stay on the field. It does help build confidence a little bit to step into. I have another worker that I'm thinking of, and as she's worked to accept that I'm not just failing, this is how my brain works. And then she's rebuilding a little bit of what am I good at? What can I do? What do I bring to the table? And then how can she communicate that in a way that her donor base, her support base, her pastors that she writes to, how can she communicate that to them in a different way? And that is a really good process, I think, for workers to go through. It's a change of thinking. It's a mind shift for organizations, this production model that we have, especially when it comes to budgets, that this can look different and people can still be successful in these other ways.
When you identified that she was specifically maybe feeling like I'm failing. Oh, my heart just broke for how that feels. And to just know that you're able, through your coaching and through these resources, to really empower people to see the story differently and to reframe away from failing to like, no, there are real strengths in the way you show up to the world. And we just need to get our eyes on those and partner with Jesus and seeing that move forward. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
How do you think that fundraising teams or organizations could better support neurodivergent members in a way that really does foster a sense of belonging, success? How can they be better allies?
This, I think, for, again, just taking it into these groups of the generation coming in now who already knows they're going to be pretty vocal and be able to share. Workers on the field who they've been on the field for 10, 15 years, and they're just realizing why it's so hard, why it's so difficult. And they're coming to their organization saying, I have just been diagnosed with autism or sensory processing or any number of things. And leadership says, oh, I don't see that in you. No, you're doing fine. You're doing great. I think if our organizations can, one, accept that people on the field, people on teams all over the world are experiencing attention challenges and executive function and high mental load and quick burnout rates due to some of these neurodivergent differences, and accept it. And then number two, if they can get some understanding. So Global Trellis ministry that I write for, we just did a neurodiversity week, and we did a day on each of some of these different, I guess, lanes of neurodiversity, like a family on the field or what member care needs to know, what our organizations need to know. Just being able to educate yourselves on, okay, so someone comes and says, I just got diagnosed with ADHD. What can you say? What is a responsible, healthy thing to say in a way that is supportive and helpful? And what kind of systems can be put in place to be an ally? Our organizations all run so differently, and the amount of resources that are available to put into something like this, or the amount of manpower there is to offer extra support, is sometimes just not there. So how can they incorporate this into what they do have? How can they step into those spaces in a healthy way that will support people on the field in a better way?
Mm-hmm.
So accept it and understand it.
Yep, absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
Now, you've already talked a lot about this, but I wonder if we give you some more time, are there any alternative approaches to fundraising that might actually work better for these neurodivergent individuals than our traditional models?
Yeah, I think actually effect of COVID and all the shutdowns was we became very familiar with Zoom and video and doing things online. I think being creative about fundraising, and if social spaces are super overwhelming, then do an online video, a live chat, or step into some of these other spaces and get creative with how you fundraise. If someone hosting a huge meal and having all these people there would be like super overwhelming, do it a different way. You be at a restaurant and they can kind of come and go, where you're not having to entertain 100 people at one time. It's going to take, in that acceptance for someone who's neurodivergent, to know their strengths, know their weaknesses, be self-aware enough to know what's not going to work for them. Letting another pastor in, like, hey, will you buddy with me today? Will you help me with the names of people? Or if I'm going on and on about something, will you kind of like have a signal, something that will stop them? This acceptance, self-awareness piece, knowing strengths and weaknesses, and then getting creative, stepping outside the box. People with ADHD, they can come up with some crazy ideas of things that they want to do, want to try. Do it, try it. Some of these things, it could be just outside the box enough that people want to hear more about what you're doing and want to give to what you're doing. It doesn't have to be the same as what someone else is doing or what we've always done.
Yeah. I know that you work, or it sounds like you work quite a bit with people that are kind of at a place where they've reached a point of burnout. Are there others that coach people more towards the beginning, when maybe people have just realized, oh, this is a consideration I need to navigate, but I'm very new to this. What should I be thinking through? How could this look? somebody to even give them the idea, hey, find a buddy that can give you cues and help you understand what's happening. Are there resources for that to prepare people?
Not yet, not a whole lot. There are coaches. Actually, it's a growing niche that's being filled of people who are stepping in to work with professionals, ministry, people who are on the spectrum, who are trying to navigate a neurotypical field, usually. And that's happening more and more. And I think our younger ones coming in, they're going to be asking for that because they do know they've had that through high school or elementary school. They had education plans and things that kind of were in place to help them. So they're used to asking for that kind of help. I think as this topic becomes more mainstream and we're talking about it more in our organizations, hopefully organizations can incorporate something like this into their onboarding, into their pre-field. Hey, if is this you? Do you have this, and this? And we can start to kind of have that conversation before they hit the field and they're overwhelmed with language and trying to buy food in another culture and the dust is everywhere and the call to prayer is going off and there's just so much happening. If we can kind of start to recognize it sooner and give people permission to seek this out and to get this kind of specialized help, I think it will go a long way again in just the sustainability of this work for people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine. So I know you said earlier that you work with, a wide variety of individuals. And let's just imagine, maybe let's just speak to the listener that they themselves don't have, maybe it's a couple and both spouses are neurotypical, but within their family, they're navigating the needs of neurodiverse children. How could that even affect fundraising, or what, encouragement would you have for that family?
Yeah, the ways it impacted my girls was we tend to use children in our fundraising. So you've got cute kids and they can speak in another language. They will hand out prayer cards. And we just assume, I think, that I love the idea that we're called as a family and our family is engaging in this work together. But it also can put a lot of pressure on our kids to perform. And that led to now, as my girls are older and they can vocalize what that was like for them, that added a lot of stress and anxiety. You're also moving from hotel to this random bedroom in this family's house, to this basement living area, to this campground. You're all over the place. So there's really nothing stable. And for kids who are not very flexible, they have very black and white rigid thinking, they need things to be the same, they need structure. The whole aspect of fundraising can just be very stressful for a family that has anyone on the spectrum, especially kids. So I think getting away from some of the prior mindsets we had of the family all traveling together or the kids being a part of fundraising or thinking that the whole family has to be at this event or that event, just assuming that after a big event, the family's going to want to go out to eat to some busy, loud restaurant where it's just, we make a lot of assumptions and we just think that the missionary family is just up for whatever and just going to go and do all the things.
They must
be flexible. Their kids must be, indestructible. This is so hard. And if you're out there listening and you're like, this is so hard, it is. It is so hard. So give yourself grace and compassion. Give yourself permission to do things differently, to say no, to put boundaries around your family's time, to slow the pace down. The budget doesn't have to be raised in a super quick, time, and just kind of slow things down. Take your time, evaluate what fits your family. It really, really is okay. And in the long run, your kids will remember that you carefully thought about their needs and intentionally protected them and helped them navigate something that is really hard.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm wondering as I listen to you, maybe just from your experience, was this lifestyle at all, as you look back, was it helpful? Was there growth that happened in your kids because of this? Or was it really just extra challenge for you guys to navigate and to be aware of?
I think both.
Yeah.
I think, of course, if I can look back, I would have, taken more care with their time and created more of a stable base for them that first time we raised funds. The second time, I was much more careful and had boundaries and protected their time. And pastors did ask, "Where's the girls? And where's Jenilee?" And, I was more confident in knowing what my girls needed and following through with that. This does lead, of course, to member care thinking, should we do this? Should we send families should we let families fundraise and go through all of this if there's neurodiversity? And I would say yes, with support, putting a team around them, with the knowledge, with the understanding, being self-aware on the member care side and knowing what they need and being upfront with that. And then on the missionary, the fundraiser side, it's possible. It takes a little extra care. And I think with that extra care, it's possible and they won't hit burnout as often as they are right now.
Would you say that you guys as parents, it fast forwarded your understanding of their needs and how to care for them in certain situations?
Yes. And then you move right in, you raise the budget, and within weeks or a few months, you're learning a new language, you're on the field. There really isn't a cushion. There isn't a recovery time. And so you're going from one fire right into another when it comes to language school and all of that. But it did highlight some of the learning disabilities. It highlighted the sensory challenges. And you come face to face with those things pretty quickly.
Can't avoid it.
Yep.
Were there any practical tools or resources that your family utilized as you were on the field and discovering your children's needs and things like that? Or are there things you've come across in your coaching that you would point people to?
Yeah. First, I would say if you have any thought or indication that this could be an impact on your family, seek out help before you go. Seek out help in your home country from doctors and systems that you are familiar with. Once you get into another country, you get into another system, things are labeled differently. The diagnostic criteria is the same, but just the process itself is very different. So I would say first that if you think at all, check into it and look into it. I had the thought that something was there, especially with my younger two, but you're just caught up in fundraising, and they were at key kindergarten, first grade, second grade, where they're learning letters and learning numbers and putting words together and these key times. And I wish I would have done that before we left. So then once we got to language school, it was yes, this is a thing. And I really waited until our first home assignment to get a lot of that, at least the first stages of educational testing and some of that taken care of. Once you're on the field, though, there is SHARE. It's an educational conference in Europe. Missionary families can travel to it. They have all the educational psychologists and testing and lots of resources available with something like that. I believe there's one in Asia as well. I don't know what it's called, but there is resources available. A lot of international schools will have a mix and match of people, this one mom who's a speech pathologist, or when you get on the field and you know what people's real home jobs are and people who are willing to help, but it's still not that official thing. Depending on where you are in the world, in certain countries, there'll be occupational therapy. There will be all the resources that you need. It's just going to look very different. So our girls' diagnosis come from South Africa, which thankfully we haven't had any issues now that we're back in the States. No one has not accepted it, or we haven't had any issues with the diagnosis papers themselves. So there's a process to do it, but if you miss the process, don't be discouraged, because there is resources available, and people like myself or your organization, your member care, who even if we don't know in your specific situation, we can talk about it and figure out what is available.
Mm-hmm.
Where would somebody start if they had no idea? This is all new to them, but they have just kind of a lingering suspicion that maybe they should look into it.
If it's kids, I would say talking to your doctor, and then educational psychologists are wonderful. Pediatric educational psychologists can be just a great help. Even if occupational therapies, the people who work with a lot of different kids with a lot of different things going on, a lot of times can see what you can't see and can help point you in the right direction. If it's a marriage situation, talking to a counselor or someone like me, a coach who can walk you through what are you seeing and what are you feeling and what's happening, what are you noticing. If you're in a situation where you need marriage counseling of some kind, making sure that that person understands neurodiversity. Counseling for someone who's neurodiverse, who's very rigid and black and white in their thinking, maybe kind of more perfectionistic, or they have short-term memory issues, or a lot of the executive function things can come into play in a counseling setting, making it difficult for the counselor to really pinpoint what's going on or what the real story is. A lot of times your traditional communication exercises or marriage tips, and this flows into parenting, your mainstream parenting books and things, you'll feel like just nothing fits. Nothing really makes sense. That's not going to work for us. I know that's not going to work in our marriage. So making sure whatever help you seek out to figure out what's going on, that they are aware of the different challenges that could be there.
It seems like that would be so pivotal, because I can just imagine how, it is already a bit of a different kind of stress to live on support, right? It invites some new things that you have to work through, good things to depend on the Lord for, but new, challenging. And so to think of on top of that, there being maybe breakdown in communication between spouses or, just not really having good tools for communication with each other or with supporters and things like that. I can just imagine how that could very quickly become such a difficult situation to maneuver, especially as you get into the overseas side of things or the ministry side of things where there's more demands on your time or expectations.
And I think it's worth the extra effort and the extra thought and intention by individuals and by organizations, because if God has called this person, this group there, then we should do everything we can to get him there.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. And it's possible. It's building awareness and bringing the conversation to the people who want to see these people succeeding and sustainably staying on the field.
I'm reflecting now on a young lady I worked with who was on the spectrum. I don't know that you would notice it from a distance, but maybe after a conversation, she was incredibly bold. She was fearless. That was pre-field as well, even in her fundraising and in her normal ministry. She was telling me stories about how she walked up and shared the gospel with somebody at the coffee shop. I'm like, wow, she has so much more courage than I do. I have no excuses. And she's blown out of the water. And she was funded so quickly because she had no second thought about it. She would just walk up and talk to somebody.
Yep.
It was fantastic.
Yep.
So be encouraged.
Yes.
So what else would you say to our listeners, Jenilee, about how they could persevere in support-based ministry as a kind of a closing thought?
Sure. Stick with it. I think wherever you find yourself on this neurodiverse spectrum of things, whether the boldness of that girl who could just walk up to someone, or you have a very timid kind of quiet work of maybe Bible translation or something like that, it's worth the effort that you're putting into it to follow God's call on your life, and building a team of people around you who can support resources that will help you, and really asking these questions before you are in full burnout is going to go a long way and really help you and your family and your team on the field.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Okay. I just want to go back to something you said, when you said this does bring up member care, and the thought of, well, should we be sending people that we know have these considerations into overseas life? I wanted to affirm that I think you're so right, Jenilee. I think that we can really delight in opportunities for God's power to really be shown in our own weakness, however that weakness comes, whether it's through something that might happen with a neurotypical brain or whether it's something that might happen with a neurodivergent brain. I just think that we can trust that as God calls people and as he meaningfully supports them and brings people alongside them, that his glory is going to be known.
Yeah. And there isn't an archetypical missionary model.
There should not be.
There shouldn't be.
I think there kind of is, but I don't think there should be.
Well, let's jostle that loose, though.
Let's jostle it.
Yeah.
Because I think he really delights to show up in our weakness. And I'm not saying that trying to equate neurodivergent with weakness. And so I hope people aren't just assuming that correlation. I'm just saying that we are pointing out and stating that the way that we've been taught to fundraise can create agitation with the way that a neurodivergent mind thrives in terms of a lot of contact with people, a lot of communication. So it's just an invitation to see that might feel like a limitation to you, but it's not to God, and he's going to do his thing.
It's an opportunity for God.
Absolutely. Maybe more a technical lingo would be a deficit. So if it can feel like you have attention deficit. There's these deficits in executive functioning, but that doesn't scare God. That's not a deficit to him. And if you're teachable and willing and able, and organizations and member care, if you're willing to dive into that with someone and get creative and think outside the box of what we traditionally see as missionary fundraising and allow this person to lean into their strengths, even if it's different, it can be a really fun thing to watch.
Yeah.
Well, and it's doing what God does, bringing more community around. Right?
Yeah.
So if there's a deficit, then community comes around, and community is how it moves forward. And so that's a beautiful thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, it sure is.
Well, Jenilee, this has been so helpful. Where can we point our listeners if they want to know more about your work or your writing and just kind of continue to learn from you?
Yeah, my website is JenileeRachel.com. And that is my coaching information, contact, everything is there. I have a specific page about neurodiversity and a post about when neurodiversity and missions collide, and that messy space of figuring out, can we do this? Is this possible? What does this mean for us in ministry? And they can contact and we can kind of brainstorm together for specific resources for your situation, because it can just be so different depending on the different family dynamics.
Awesome. And we will also link that in show notes so nobody has to worry about spelling and such.
Yeah. Good.
You got the final question, Andy?
Oh, I'll do the honors.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, Jenilee. So we'd like to end with a fun question. You've been invited to a TED Talk. You take the stage in about 10 minutes and you can't speak about neurodiversity. What is your talk going to be about?
Okay. If I had a TED Talk, I would talk about raising girls who are loving each other and friends and get along really well. I'm one of 3 girls myself, and then I have 3 daughters. So I think talking about girls and friendship and raising girls would be my topic.
I love that. And I kind of wish I could find the equivalent of that for boys, because our boys are in the age where there's a lot of bickering. But
I would listen to that. Yeah, I have a couple of girls, and sometimes they get along.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Jenilee, thank you so much for your time. And again, I really do think that this is a worthy topic, and I am encouraged, and I'm confident that our listeners will be as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
It's Not About the Money is presented by Provisio Fundraising Solutions. Provisio equips support-based workers with flexible training, practical resources, and one-on-one coaching. Find out more at provisiofundraising.com.